What if you planted a food crop once, just once, and it fed your family for 3 decades? That's not a fantasy. It's Tamarillo, a tree that outproduces tomatoes by 10 times, stores for half a year without refrigeration, and was deliberately phased out of American gardens in the 1960s. Not because it stopped working, because it worked too well. Most videos will tell you this plant exists. They'll inspire you with the story of suppression, and then they'll leave you stuck. Wondering where to find it, how to grow it in your climate, what to do if it fails. This video is different. We're not just opening the archive. We're showing you exactly where to buy it, how to grow it in cold climates, and what to do if something goes wrong. Here's what they buried, and here's how to bring it back. In 1943, in the mountains of Tennessee, a grandmother planted a tree tomato behind her farmhouse. It grew 12 feet tall that first summer. She harvested fruit from that tree for 18 years straight. Every spring, summer, and fall, buckets of fruit. Enough to feed her family, her neighbors, and still have surplus for the winter. Every nursery sold them back then. Every farm family had one. They were as common as apple trees. Then, slowly, they stopped appearing in catalogs. By the 1960s, they were gone from American gardens. Not banned, not illegal, just forgotten. She kept growing hers until the 1970s. One of the last in her county. One of the last who remembered. When she passed, that knowledge almost went with her. But the plant didn't disappear. The knowledge did. That memory, that connection to a time when perennial food was normal, is what we're here to resurrect. This is the Tamarillo, also called the tree tomato. Scientific name, Cyphomandra batasea, though it's recently been reclassified to Solanum bataseum. It's native to the Andes Mountains of South America, Ecuador, Colombia, Peru. The same region that gave us potatoes, quinoa, and dozens of other crops we now consider essential. It's a perennial in the nightshade family, related to tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants. But unlike those annuals that die every winter, this tree lives for 20 to 30 years. One planting, 3 decades of harvest. That's the core of why it disappeared. But before we get to that story, let me show you what you're missing. The tree grows 8 to 12 feet tall, fast growing. You'll see significant growth in the first year. The fruit is egg-shaped, smooth-skinned, about 2 to 3 inches long. It comes in 2 main varieties, red and golden. The red is more tart, the golden sweeter. The taste is hard to describe if you've never had one. It's not exactly a tomato, despite the name. More like if a tomato and a passion fruit had a child, with hints of apricot. Tart, slightly sweet, complex. You can eat them fresh. Scoop out the flesh with a spoon. You can cook them into sauces, jams, chutneys. You can juice them. You can dry them. The texture is firmer than a tomato, which is why they store so much longer. And here's something important. The fruit is safe for humans and pets when ripe. But like all nightshades, keep pets away from the leaves and stems. They contain alkaloids. The fruit itself, perfectly safe. Now here's where it gets interesting. A mature Tamarillo tree, year 3 onward, produces between 1,000 and 3,000 pounds of fruit per year. Let me say that again. 1,000 to 3,000 pounds from one tree. For comparison, a tomato plant, if you're a skilled gardener with good conditions, might give you 10 to 30 pounds in a season. Maybe 50 if you're really good. Even if you planted 10 tomato plants every year and got perfect yields, you're looking at about 500 pounds annually. The Tamarillo does double that, minimum, from one tree that you plant once. And it does this for 20 to 30 years. Do the math. One tree, 20 years, average 2,000 pounds per year. That's 40,000 pounds of food from a single planting. Compare that to tomatoes. 20 years, 10 plants per year, 50 pounds per plant. That's 10,000 pounds. And you had to replant 200 times, 4 times the food, 1/10 the effort. Now ask yourself, if this plant is this productive, this long-lived, and this low maintenance, why isn't it in every American backyard? Before you think this sounds too good to be true, understand, this isn't theoretical. Tamarillos are grown commercially in New Zealand, Australia, Ecuador, Colombia, Peru, Kenya, and parts of India. In Ecuador, you can walk into any market and find piles of them. They're as common as apples are here. In New Zealand, they're a staple backyard crop. Millions of trees, decades of cultivation. This is proven. The question isn't whether Tamarillo works. The question is, why don't you know about it? Why is a plant this productive, this reliable, this well-established globally, completely absent from American gardens? That's not an accident. Let's do the math one more time, differently. One tree costs about $20 to $30 for a plant, or $10 for seeds. 30 years of harvest. 0 replanting costs. Minimal maintenance. Versus tomatoes. Buying plants every year, 30 years. You're spending hundreds of dollars minimum. So why isn't this plant everywhere? Here's what happened. In the early 1900s, Tamarillos were sold in American nurseries. Not everywhere, but they were available. Specialty catalogs carried them. Horticultural societies discussed them. By the 1950s, you could still find them occasionally. They were more common in California, Florida, parts of the South. By the 1970s, they'd essentially vanished from American seed catalogs and nurseries. And by the 1990s, an entire generation of gardeners had never heard of them. This wasn't a ban. There was no law against Tamarillos. They didn't become illegal. They were just quietly erased. So what happened? Why would a plant this productive, this easy to grow, this beneficial to home gardeners, disappear? The answer isn't one reason, it's 5. Reason 1. The shift to industrial agriculture. In the 1950s and 60s, American agriculture became industrialized. Monoculture, massive fields of single crops, mechanized harvesting, standardized varieties. Perennial crops don't fit that model. You can't harvest a Tamarillo tree with a combine. You can't spray an entire field uniformly when trees are different ages and sizes. Annual crops, tomatoes, peppers, lettuce, fit the industrial model perfectly. Plant in spring, harvest in summer, plow under in fall. Repeat next year. Tamarillos, they're there for 30 years. They don't fit. Reason 2. The business model of seed companies. Here's a simple truth. Seed companies make money when you buy seeds. If you plant an annual tomato, you buy seeds every year. Or you buy seedlings every year. That's recurring revenue. But a perennial? You buy it once. Maybe you propagate from cuttings after that. 0 repeat sales. A plant that lives 30 years and produces thousands of pounds. That's the worst product imaginable if you're selling seeds. Reason 3. Consolidation of the nursery industry. In the 1980s, something happened. Small regional nurseries started disappearing, bought out by larger companies, consolidated. By the late 80s, 5 corporations controlled about 95% of seed and plant distribution in America. 5 companies, 95% of what you're allowed to buy. They decided what went in catalogs. They decided what got shelf space. They decided what the average gardener even knew existed. Tamarillo, not profitable enough. Too niche. Didn't fit the suburban garden aesthetic they were selling. So it stopped appearing in catalogs. Not banned, just not listed. Reason 4. The suburban garden culture shift. Post-war suburban culture valued lawns and ornamental gardens, neat rows of annual flowers, tidy vegetable beds with tomatoes and peppers that you replanted every spring. A 12-foot tree that drops fruit for 30 years? That doesn't fit the aesthetic. Home gardening became recreation, not food production. It became about spending money at the garden center every spring. The whole culture shifted away from perennial food. And reason 5. The frost events and climate assumptions. Tamarillos are subtropical. They can't handle hard freezes below about 28 degrees. In the 1980s, there were several severe freezes in Florida and California, the places where most Tamarillo cultivation was happening. Trees died, nurseries lost stock, and instead of saying, let's breed cold hardy varieties, or let's teach container growing for cold climates, the industry just stopped carrying them. It was easier to sell tomatoes. So here's what you need to understand. This wasn't one villain. It wasn't a conspiracy in the sense of a secret plot. It was a system. Industrial agriculture, seed company profits, nursery consolidation, suburban aesthetics, and climate assumptions that all aligned to make one outcome inevitable. Perennial food crops disappeared. Annual dependence became normal. Food cannot nourish when it represents bondage to a system that profits from your dependence. The Tamarillo didn't fit that system, so it was erased. But here's what they couldn't erase. While researching this video, I found a comment from an archaeobotanist, someone who studies ancient crops for a living. They wrote, "What shocks me is not that Tamarillo outperforms tomatoes, but that a 30-year perennial was systematically erased from American memory while thriving everywhere else." That's the key word. Systematically. The plant didn't disappear. American knowledge of it did. So how do we bring that knowledge back? Let's start with climate. Tamarillo thrives in USDA zones 10 and 11. That's Southern California, Southern Florida, coastal areas of the Gulf Coast, Southern Texas, Southern Arizona. If you're in Zone 9, it'll grow, but needs frost protection. Mulch heavily November through February. If temperatures drop below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, cover the tree with frost cloth. It can handle light frost, but not hard freezes. Now, if you're in Zone 7 or 8, here's the trick. Grow it in a container. Use a 15 to 20 gallon pot with good drainage holes. Keep it outdoors spring through fall. Then, before the first frost, bring it inside. A south-facing window works. An unheated sunroom works. It just needs to stay above 50 degrees Fahrenheit to survive. 60 degrees to really thrive. Check the comments on Tamarillo videos. You'll see Zone 7 and 8 gardeners succeeding with this method. The plant stays smaller in a pot, maybe 6 to 8 feet instead of 12, but you'll still get 20 to 40 pounds of fruit per year. Not bad for bringing it inside 4 months a year. You can start from seed or from a cutting. Cuttings are faster. They'll fruit in year 1. Seeds take about 2 years to fruit. Plant in full sun, at least 6 hours of direct sunlight daily. Soil should be well draining and slightly acidic. A pH of 6 to 6.5 is ideal. If you have heavy clay, amend with compost and sand. Space trees, 8 to 10 feet apart if you're planting multiple, or grow solo in a container. Water regularly, about 1 inch per week. More during fruiting season, less in winter if the tree goes dormant. They're not particularly picky plants. They want sun, water, decent drainage. That's about it. Pruning. Light. Just shape the tree and remove any dead or damaged wood. You don't need to prune heavily. Fertilizing monthly during the growing season. Use a balanced fertilizer, something like 10-10-10, or use compost. The biggest challenge is cold protection, which we already discussed. Pests. Generally, tamarillos are pest resistant. Aphids occasionally. Maybe whiteflies. Nothing major. Far less pest pressure than tomatoes. Diseases. In humid climates, watch for fungal issues. Good air circulation helps. Don't overcrowd plants. One note: the fruit can attract birds when it ripens. Some people net their trees. Others just plant enough that sharing with birds is fine. That's really it. It's a low-maintenance tree once established. Fruit ripens in late summer through winter, depending on your climate. You'll know it's ready when the color deepens and the fruit gives slightly to gentle pressure. Like a ripe avocado. Harvest by gently twisting or clipping with scissors. Leave a short stem attached. Store at room temperature for about a week. Refrigerated, they last several weeks. Frozen, they last 6 months. That's the storage claim you saw in the title. The knowledge was suppressed, but the plant never disappeared. Here's how to find it in 2025. Baker Creek Seeds carries red tamarillo and golden tamarillo. Both ship to all 50 states. Logi's greenhouse offers 2-year-old starter plants. Or check your local tropical plant nursery. Ask for Siphamandra bettacea or tree tomato. And once you have it, you're not just growing a plant, you're resurrecting a memory. When you plant a tamarillo, you're not planting a crop, you're planting a legacy. Think about that. A tree that will still be producing fruit in the year 2050, when you're older, when your children are adults, when your grandchildren are learning to garden. One planting, one decision. Decades of impact. This is the perennial mindset. It's the opposite of the annual treadmill. Planting, harvesting, plowing under, replanting, year after year after year. Perennial food is patience. It's thinking beyond next season. It's planting for your future self. And it's resisting the system that wants you dependent on annual seeds. So here's your first step. Start here. Search Tamarillo Baker Creek today. Order seeds this week. Plant this spring. That's the first step. Now here's why that step matters. These plants are keys to a different world. A world where your food comes from your backyard, not from a corporation's warehouse. Where a single planting feeds you for 30 years. Where knowledge isn't controlled by 5 companies deciding what you're allowed to grow. They erased this plant because they couldn't profit from it. Because a tree that lives 30 years, that you plant once, that produces thousands of pounds over its lifetime, that's the opposite of dependence. That's self-sufficiency. And self-sufficiency doesn't generate recurring revenue. So they want you replanting every spring, buying seeds every year, buying seedlings every year, dependent on their system. But you can choose differently. Every tamarillo tree is an act of resistance. Every harvest is proof that you don't need them. Every seed you share, every cutting you give to a neighbor is knowledge they can't erase again. The grandmother in Tennessee who kept her tree until the 70s, she was resisting. She didn't call it that, but that's what it was. And now you have the same choice she did. Plant perennial food security instead of annual dependence. Build a garden that outlasts the trends, the industries, the systems that come and go. The question is, will you?